Highbridge, a division of Recorded Books, presents A House Full of Females, Plural Marriage and Women's Rights in Early Mormonism, 1835 to 1870, by Laurel Thatcher Ulrich, read by Susan Ericksen. Organize yourselves. Prepare every needful thing, and establish a house, even a house of prayer, a house of fasting, a house of faith, a house of learning, a house of glory, a house of order, a house of God. Doctrine and Covenants of the Church of the Latter-day Saints, Kirkland, Ohio, 1835. The house was full of females, quilting, sewing, etc. Wilford Woodruff Diary, Salt Lake City, Territory of Utah, 1857. The records of this house shall prove we're neither slack nor slow. Eliza Roxy Snow, Hymn for the Dedication of the 15th Ward Relief Society Hall, 1869. Introduction. An Indignation Meeting. Salt Lake City, Utah Territory, 1870. Light snow obscured the view of the mountains on January 13, 1870, as masses of Mormon women crowded into the old peaked-roof tabernacle in Salt Lake City. The pine benches were hard, the pot-bellied stoves inadequate against the cold. No matter. They would warm themselves with indignation. The news had come by telegraph a week before. The much-feared Cullum Bill had passed the United States House of Representatives. If the Senate concurred, the government would soon have the power to confiscate Mormon property, deprive wives of immunity as witnesses, and imprison their husbands. This wasn't the first time Congress had attempted to outlaw the Mormon marriage system. Calls for federal action had begun 14 years before with the Republican Party platform of 1856, which linked polygamy in Utah and slavery in the South as twin relics of barbarism. Representative Justice S. Morrill of Vermont enunciated the essential argument. Under the guise of religion, this people has established and seek to maintain and perpetuate a Mohammedan barbarism revolting to the civilized world. Novelists and the new illustrated weeklies took up the chorus, linking Utahns not only with the Southern slaveholders, but with Turks, Africans, and Indians on both sides of the world. Although Congress responded by passing an anti-polygamy statute in 1861, there was little hope of enforcement in the midst of the Civil War. Now, with Reconstruction underway in the South, reformers decided to try again. Arguing that Utah women were slaves to a system worse than death, they scoffed at the sickly sentimentality which proposes to punish nobody, which proposes to hang nobody, which proposes to let all the unchained passions of the human heart become free to prey upon mankind. "What nonsense!" Eliza Snow exclaimed from the platform of the old tabernacle. She and other leaders among Salt Lake City women had acted quickly to organize an indignation meeting, a well-recognized form of protest in the 19th-century United States. Indignation was more than anger. It was sympathetic outrage directed at an injustice. The goal was publicity in its broadest sense. Cleverly banning all males except the press, they showcased their most effective speakers. Amanda Smith, widowed years before by anti-Mormon mobs in Missouri, brought tears to her listeners' eyes as she repeated the story of her suffering. Hannah King, an English immigrant, asked, "Are we really in America, the world-renowned land of liberty, of freedom, of equal rights, the land of which I dreamed in my youth, where freedom of thought and religious liberty were enjoyed by all?" Eleanor Pratt said she had been turned out of doors for her faith, and would willingly give her life for it. Phoebe Woodruff warned that if Congress chose to imprison Mormon men, they would have to make their prisons large enough to hold their wives, for where they go, we will go also. The reporter for the New York Herald, disgusted at the sight of infatuated females speaking in favor of a system repugnant to women of finer feelings, nevertheless produced a full-page account of the speeches. The San Francisco Evening Bulletin pronounced the meeting one of the most remarkable, perhaps, that has ever congregated on the continent. To see a mass of between 3,000 and 4,000 women, nearly all Anglo-Saxon, many of them American-born and raised, meeting together to advocate the claims of polygamy and defend the men who practice it, is food for reflection and moralizing. For the Daily Cleveland Herald, the explanation was obvious. The women were as strongly attached to their peculiar and unpopular faith as the men can be. The Mormon-dominated legislature in Utah soon demonstrated their confidence in their wives and sisters by passing a bill granting women the vote. Although the question of woman suffrage had been raised in Washington during debates over granting rights of citizenship to freed slaves, only the most radical among Eastern reformers were prepared to embrace it. When the tiny Wyoming legislature passed a woman suffrage bill in December 1869, most people considered it a stunt, since there were so few white inhabitants in Wyoming Territory and 6 times as many males as females. The situation in Utah was different. Females composed a slight majority of the territory's 86,000 non-native residents. Ironically, the idea of enfranchising Utah women first appeared in a New York Times article, the writer surmising that if women were empowered, they would eliminate polygamy. No one imagined they would stand up and defend it. And what is the use of woman suffrage if it is to be used to bolster up an institution so degrading to the sex and demoralizing to society? Concluded a reporter from New Jersey. The spectacle in Utah soon attracted the attention of Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony, 2 of the most powerful advocates for women's suffrage. Still smarting over the refusal of Congress to embrace their cause, they added Utah to the itinerary for a journey west in 1871. After several days in Salt Lake City, Stanton told the press that antagonists on the Mormon question had missed the point. Polygamy and monogamy were both oppressive systems. She argued that those who opposed the Latter-day Saints were every bit as befuddled as the saints themselves. The condition of women is slavery today, and must be so long as they are shut out of the world of work, helpless dependence on man for bread. She was nevertheless pleased that Utah women had the vote. Eventually, she accepted polygamous wives as allies. Mormon women responded by becoming ardent members of Stanton's movement. For 40 years, the Woman's Exponent, founded in 1872, advocated for the rights of the women of Zion and the rights of the women of all nations. The emergence of Utah women as political actors was so remarkable, so unexpected, that even today it is often dismissed as an anomaly, one of those strange events so out of the mainstream as to defy explanation. The word paradox appears again and again in books and articles dealing with the topic. How could women simultaneously support a national campaign for political and economic rights while defending marital practices that to most people seemed relentlessly patriarchal? At one level, the answer is obvious. Their own community was threatened. By standing up as women, they defended their homes and their religious identity. But that explanation is too simple. If an Eastern newspaper dropped a match that ignited a women's rights movement in Utah in 1870, the fuel for that blaze had been accumulating for years. Utah may have looked like an old-world patriarchy, with its biblical terminology, theocratic government, and retreat into a valley with a Dead Sea and a River Jordan. But those who migrated there had been touched by the radical energies of the 1830s and 1840s. By the time the Mormons arrived in Utah, female as well as male leaders knew how to circulate petitions, sign affidavits, lobby public officials, and employ the power of the press. By embracing Mormonism, the leaders of the indignation meeting had already shown a willingness to push against the grain. Some had abandoned homes, families, and legal husbands in order to do so. They were religious seekers who, before becoming Latter-day Saints, had been Methodists, Quakers, Anglicans, Campbellites, and everything in between. As Latter-day Saints, they had experimented with health reform, dress reform, and communitarianism. Some practiced, even if they did not yet preach, forms of sex radicalism, the idea that a woman should choose when and with whom she would bear children. Their indignation emerged from religious passion, from a yearning for millennial justice, from the experience of being hounded and driven from place to place, and from the frustration of vainly petitioning judges, governors, and presidents for redress. As Latter-day Saints, they were victims of ignorant and sometimes willful misrepresentation by outsiders, but they were surely exaggerating when they claimed they had experienced nothing but liberty in Utah. As their own writings attest, they had endured both condescension and open opposition from church leaders. By 1870, they had demonstrated their facility as organizers by banding together to solve problems in Utah and by rebuilding the Female Relief Society, a women's voluntary society founded in Nauvoo, Illinois in 1842 and dissolved by Brigham Young in 1845. They planned their indignation meeting in a newly dedicated Relief Society Hall that had an upper floor for meetings and a lower one for selling goods created through cooperative labor. Without question, Congress's attempt to outlaw polygamy outraged them, but it also strengthened their position within their own community as they rose in its defense. Their support for their brethren was sincere, but it was also strategic. They knew when and how to ask for the things that they wanted, and they wanted the right to vote. When the woman suffrage bill passed, they quickly appointed a committee to thank the territory's acting governor, a non-Mormon, for signing it, then went about teaching citizenship to women in outlying parts of the territory. The history of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints typically focuses on its founding prophets, Joseph Smith, who in 1830 published the Book of Mormon, and then, over the next decade, established communities in Ohio, Missouri, and Illinois, and Brigham Young, who, after Smith's murder in 1844, led the largest faction of Latter-day Saints to the Rocky Mountains. Smith and Young were powerful and charismatic leaders, but Mormonism, like other religious movements, flourished because it attracted strong women. Collectively, the 29 leaders of the indignation meeting had experienced the entire history of the church, from its founding in upstate New York in 1830 through the epic migration to Utah. 2/3 of them had become Latter-day Saints before Smith's death. All but 2 had arrived in Utah by 1855. If there was a Mormon culture in the territory in 1870, they had helped create it. They came from Cambridgeshire, Wiltshire, Kent, Devon, and Oxfordshire in England, from Wales, Scotland, and Upper Canada, and from the states of Georgia, South Carolina, Virginia, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Massachusetts, New York, Maine, and Vermont. Few had stayed long in one place. Eliza Snow, though born in western Massachusetts, grew up in Ohio. Eleanor Pratt, a Virginian, met Mormon missionaries in San Francisco, Mary McKin in Philadelphia, and Harriet Cook in Boston. Mary Isabella Horn started life in England, migrated to Canada, and then, as an early convert, joined the Saints in Ohio. Phoebe Woodruff worked as a teacher and dressmaker in coastal Maine before migrating to Ohio. Later, she lived with her missionary husband in Lancashire, England, and in Boston. Well before plural marriage became a recognized practice in the Church, these women had learned to value bonds of faith over biological or regional connections. I am proud to say to you that I am not only a citizen of the United States of America, but a citizen of the Kingdom of God, Wilmarth East exclaimed from the pulpit of the old tabernacle. Jealous of their rights as Americans, even if born outside the United States, they did not want to be rescued by those who neither understood nor valued their faith. When Harriet Cook claimed both the rights of American citizenship and the privilege of marrying a husband of her choice, she was defending polygamy. All of the speakers stood up for the practice, even if they had not lived it. Sarah Kimball, who presided over the meeting, had never been a plural wife, nor had Amanda Smith or Hannah Tapfield King. Yet all three embraced plurality as a theological concept. The reporter from San Francisco found the sight of several thousand women becoming advocates for polygamy food for reflection and moralizing. Today, the same phenomenon offers food for historical investigation. Others have written, and will continue to write, about what happened after Utah women won the vote. This book focuses on the decades-long struggle that brought them to that point. It explores the pathways they traveled from monogamy to polygamy, and from urban boarding houses, Midwestern farms, and English cottages to the slant-roofed old tabernacle in Salt Lake City. It asks why so many women, nearly all Anglo-Saxon, were willing to defend a system others considered degrading. Plural marriage, as the Saints called it, emerged gradually and in secret in Nauvoo, Illinois, the utopian city the Saints built on the banks of the Mississippi River after being driven from Missouri. Joseph Smith took his first plural wife in the spring of 1841, and over the next 3 years was sealed to more than 24 women. The exact number is uncertain. One historian refers to these early sealings as proto-polygamy. Proto meaning giving rise to or being ancestral to distinguish it from the later, more developed practice. The Female Relief Society also developed in Nauvoo. In a meeting above his red brick store, Smith promised he would make of the society a kingdom of priests, as in Enoch's day, as in Paul's day. Within 2 years, it had more than 1,300 members devoted to poor relief and support for construction of a massive temple. Shortly before his death, Joseph and his legal wife, Emma Hale Smith, prepared a select group of women and men to officiate in temple ceremonies, even though the temple itself was not yet complete. Polygamy and temple rituals flourished in the months after Smith's death. The Relief Society did not. When Emma Smith, who was its president, rejected Brigham Young as her husband's successor, he disbanded it. Although most of its members followed Young to Utah, roughly 15% stayed behind, among them Emma Smith, who raised her children to believe that their father had never had other wives. Thus, at the heart of the succession from Smith to Young was a division in the female community. Eliza Snow, who had been one of Smith's plural wives, carried the Relief Society Minute Book with her to Utah. In the years to come, she used it to remind her closest associates of the promises they had received in Nauvoo. For Latter-day Saints, plurality was not just a social system. It was a means of salvation. Joseph Smith shocked his contemporaries by teaching that human intelligences, he used the plural form, were co-eternal with God. Moreover, all the spirits that God ever sent into the world are susceptible to enlargement. Enlargement included but was by no means limited to biological reproduction. In a poem written to a female friend, Eliza Snow portrayed individual affinities as nodes in an interlocking web that connected noble spirits across the earth and from earth to heaven, and still extending on from world to world, unto creation's undefined extent. To her, it did not matter whether a woman was the only wife or one among many, since all the righteous would eventually be bound together. She insisted that spiritual bonds produced a holier feeling than friendship, witnessing the possibility of an eternal network of souls, twined and intertwined, combining and combined. After Joseph Smith's death, Eliza Snow joined Brigham Young's household. In 1870, she was living with a dozen of his other wives in the Lion House, a gabled structure on South Temple Street that took its name from a stone lion that stood over the door. Although outsiders referred to it as Brigham's harem, it could also have been described as an experiment in cooperative housekeeping and an incubator of female activism. For years, Zena D.H. Young, who gave the prayer at the indignation meeting, lived across the hall from Eliza. Harriet Cook Young, one of the more flamboyant speakers at the meeting, lived 2 doors down. As an architectural structure, the Lion House was unique. Most polygamous wives lived in houses that, whether large or small, looked like vernacular dwellings found elsewhere in the United States. Yet the concept of female cooperation was widespread. Mormonism reinforced and at the same time transformed patterns of association common to rural societies everywhere. Women banded together to spin, weave, and care for the sick, but also to participate in sacred rituals. The defining concept was not plural marriage, but gathering, a belief that those who accepted the faith had a duty to join their fellow believers in building a new Zion. Plural marriage was pervasive, but far from universal. Although by 1860 more than 40% of the territory's inhabitants, men, women, and children, lived in plural households, the composition of those households varied widely. 2/3 of polygamist husbands had only 2 wives. Another 20% had 3. Those who had 4 or more were often members of high church councils or bishops of local congregations, and, as in any society, birth, death, and migration reshaped families. Over time, a monogamist might embrace polygamy, or a polygamist, through death or divorce, find himself with 1 wife or none. A small oil painting completed in central Utah in 1872 portrays the interior of an ordinary Utah house shortly after the birth of a baby. The midwife and several female attendants have tucked the new mother into bed and are now weighing the infant. This is a classic gathering of women performing classic female work. There is nothing in the painting to tell us that the woman in the bed is 29-year-old Gunhild Torgerson Dorius, who has just given birth to a son named Hiram. Nor, without family records, could we know that she and Kyla Franzen Dorius, the tall woman in the center of the picture, were both married to the man at the door, Frederick Ferdinand Dorius, a Danish immigrant who was a friend of the painter, C.C.A. Christensen. Gunhild and Kaja were plural wives who belonged to a more expansive sisterhood built through spiritual, social, and economic associations. In all likelihood, the midwife who was weighing the baby was empowered to bless and anoint the mother, as well as to officiate at the birth. Years later, a granddaughter remembered Gunhild as a quiet, gentle little lady who carded and spun her own wool for cloth and believed polygamy to be a sacred principle. When visitors came, she pointed with pride to a picture of her husband dressed in prison stripes with other Mormon men incarcerated during the anti-polygamy raids of the late 19th century. She said his imprisonment proved that he loved her, because he could have avoided prosecution by renouncing their marriage. To outsiders, the Lion House represented the Gothic strangeness of Mormonism. To an insider like C.C.A. Christensen, the Dorius House represented its comforting familiarity. Both kinds of houses were part of the Mormon story, as were the public buildings where Latter-day Saint women engaged in collaborative work and eventually in political protest. On a winter day in 1857, a 50-year-old Mormon apostle named Wilford Woodruff visited the 14th Ward Meeting House in Salt Lake City. In his diary, he noted, "The house was full of females, quilting, sewing, etc." Wilford had 3 wives and was about to acquire a 4th. His own house was full of females. But this gathering was different. Sometimes as many as 50 women assembled for meetings of the Ward Relief Society. His first wife, Phoebe, was its president. Remarkably, one of the quilts its members were making has recently been found. Completed in the autumn of 1857, it was later sold at a raffle. The man who won it cut it down the middle years later and gave 1/2 to each of his 2 grown daughters. They and their heirs passed it on until no one was quite sure where their own piece had come from and what had happened to the other. Brought together in 2004, the 2 halves, only slightly damaged by time, reveal the signatures in ink and in thread of the 67 women who made it. Phoebe's autograph appears on 1/2, her appliqued fruit and flowers on the other. The sundering and reuniting of the quilt offers a metaphor for the losses and recoveries that characterize women's history. This book is a kind of quilt, an attempt to find an underlying unity in the collection of fragments. Because I want to understand early Mormonism from the perspective of those who embraced it, I have chosen to focus on diaries and other day-by-day records, such as letters, occasional poetry, and minutes of meetings. Some historians silently merge documents like these with autobiographies and memoirs written decades later. I have not done that. Retrospective accounts are valuable, but they have to be understood in relation to the conflicts and commemorations that produce them. Since every word written about early Mormonism was and is controversial, it is important to know when as well as what people wrote. This is not to say that diaries are more truthful than memoirs, just better at conveying the instability of events as they unfolded. Diarists did not know how things would turn out. When Wilford Woodruff began keeping a diary in 1835, not only were there few Mormon diarists, there were few Mormons. Over his lifetime, he did his best to change both of those things. Remembered as a prodigious missionary, he also preached the gospel of diary keeping. In March 1857, he told a gathering of Mormon leaders, "I have kept a journal of almost every day of my life for the last 24 years. I could tell each day what I had done, what company I was in, and what...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?